So I've been the Fire Safety Manager at the Science and Technology Facilities Council. So it's basically the UK's arm of science. So we do a lot of science and research, technology. We've got a large Hadron Collider kind of thing at our place, a bit like the one at CERN. That was a bit nervy when I took the job on, thinking, my God, that's some sort of really technological stuff. We've got the space arm of government, so we do satellite testing and all that kind of stuff. So I've got quite a varied risk profile. And like many of you, probably a really mixed bag of estate. So we've got newer buildings, which are compliant with DDA requirements, and it's very easy to put PEEPs in place and get people out of a building. And then I've got some really, really old stuff that it's a lot more challenging to get people out of the building safely. So this is a topic that's quite close to my heart in terms of trying to get it right for those people. So starting off, this is your sort of usual opening gambit with any sort of legislation and regulatory requirement. We've got the obvious financial, legal and moral things to consider. And also for me in this space, reputational as well. The people who've got impairments and disabilities want to come and work for an organisation where they're going to potentially feel unsafe. So I always say to people, when you're getting people around for interviews, you know, they need to be aware of the environment they're going to be working in, because some of our environments are very challenging for people with certain disablements. So it's just something that I think we need to consider. And for me, the big one on there, yes, it's a legal requirement, but we are morally obliged to get people out of the building and make them feel safe and comfortable. If you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people need to feel safe. And by putting a PEEP in place, an effective one, we can do a really good job of helping with that. So just as a couple of statistics, out of the UK population of 67 million, there's about 16 million people who are disabled, and there's around about 15 million who've got some form of impairment that are in the working sort of age group. So it is an issue that is out there. So why a PEEP might be needed? So essentially in an emergency, especially when it comes to a fire breaking out in a building, it can be quite panicked. And the safe evacuation of all residents and occupants should be the priority to get everybody out of the building. And a PEEP is needed when a relevant person requires additional support during an evacuation to get out. Because basically some people will not be able to evacuate themselves out of the building. So if you think about the kind of key ones, you've got disabilities, people who are physically unable to get out, people who might not be able to hear the fire alarms going off, people who might not be able to see what's going on as well. So there's a range of things, and I think PEEPs has always been centred around the physical disabilities and the wheelchair users and whatnot. But I've got a lot of autistic people at my organisation who have to wear noise-cancelling headphones at work, and therefore we need to put measures in place to make sure that they can get out of the building if the alarms go off. And also a PEEP is needed when the situation is potentially temporary as well. So again, it often gets overlooked. So if somebody's hurt themselves in an accident of some sort and they're now on crutches, we still need to put a PEEP in place, even though it's a temporary PEEP, to make sure that we've got relevant arrangements in place to get people out. So the two big legal aspects of this, so we've got the Equalities Act, which essentially prohibits discrimination based on protected characteristics, and in this case we're looking at disability. And it requires employers to make reasonable adjustments to support employees who may have difficulty escaping in an emergency. So creating PEEPs for people to keep them safe is absolutely key to this. Is it reasonable to knock down the building again and rebuild it so it's DDA compliant? No, absolutely not. But we might need to make some adjustments to the workplace. So we might need to change our fire alarm and detection system. We might need to upgrade stairwells to make sure that they are a proper 60-minute box to keep people safe in. All depending on the circumstances. and also how many people we're looking at as well. So I think there's a few things that we need to consider in terms of the Equality Act and compliance there. In regards to the fire safety order, there's nothing specific in the fire safety order that says you have to have a PEEP, but it does say in there that you have to make arrangements to get people out of the building safely, and that includes all people. And it also asks you to look at things like people who are specifically at risk. So people with a disability or an impairment will come into that bracket. So we need to make sure we've got some arrangements in place for them. So thinking about impairments, just to go over a few of them, obviously we've touched on this a little bit. We've got people with mobility issues. Some people with mobility issues might be able to get out of the building unaided. So that's always your first question. There was a massive fuss about a gentleman in my organisation. He's a double amputee, and they were all fussing about him. And I sat him down and said, "What do you need?" And the answer was, nothing. If there's a fire in here, I'm off. I'll get out of here before these guys with legs. So, you know, he wears prosthetics ordinarily, but sometimes he does take them off. But he can get down the stairs, and said he'll get out, no problem at all. But we've asked a question. We've gone through the motion. And I think that's what I really want to hit on, that it's about the individual of PEEP. It's not about what the line manager thinks he's doing to tick the box. It's got to be centred around the person. So you've got mobility issues, you've got people with visual impairments, you've got people with hearing difficulty and cognitive issues as well. And also for me, one of the big things that's coming out at the moment is people who have got autism and whatnot, who respond differently in alarm situations. We need to be really mindful of that. And as I said before, permanent ones for people with permanent ailments and disabilities, but also temporary ones for people who have just had an accident and they're going to be off the run for short periods themselves. So collaboration is absolutely key. It's a duty of the responsible person for the building in terms of in fire safety terms to make sure there is PEEPs in place and we do look after people. Like I said, it doesn't mention it specifically in the fire safety order, but what we need to be mindful of is, apologies, the fact that this is a collaborative effort. So my first thing I do is sit down with the individuals when I'm reviewing a PEEP to make sure that they're comfortable and happy with what's in the PEEP. I do that outside of the line management chain. The line management isn't allowed in at that point. So I know that they are happy themselves, and then we go and sit with the line manager as well, and we go through what actions are needed to enact the PEEP and make sure that all of the review, the training, and all the good stuff is kind of taking place. But like I said, I can't emphasize enough, the PEEP development, the person, the individual has to be at the center of that PEEP. So thinking about facilities, as I said before, in the built environment, sometimes this is a little bit challenging because, you know, I've got a lot of buildings with narrow stairs, with, you know, sometimes you have to go up and down to get out of a building. And obviously sometimes you've got steps as well to get out of a building. So it's all these things you've got to look at in terms of the structure of the building. But disabled refuges is a bit of a sticking point for me because, dare I say it, some estates departments, and I'm not just talking about my own estates department, we're working quite collaboratively now moving forward, but other places I've worked, the estates departments will say, oh, we'll make it into a refuge, we'll just stick an EVC in there, and now it's a refuge, and it's not thinking about the space that's needed to actually put a wheelchair user and a buddy while we're waiting and without blocking the escape route. It's things like making sure that the compartmentation is fine. So if you are thinking of upgrading normal stairwells to become a disabled refuge, things like looking at space, looking at compartmentation and the fire resistance of that compartment, and other aspects that you might need in there. So again, it's looking at getting into a bit of the fire engineering side of it. Does this part of the building support being a refuge? How compliant will we be? Because the last thing we want to do is wheel somebody into an area, leave them there, and the smoke travelling from wherever the fire is into the compartment, because we've not done a compartmentation survey. We've not looked above the false ceilings and stuff like that. So it's all that kind of stuff we just need to look at. Evacuation chairs, how easy are these to manage? Making sure you've got for me, making sure you've got the same one across the whole of your estate. So for me, I've got 90 odd buildings at my biggest laboratory, and I've got about 6 different types of evacuation chair. Becomes a bit of a nightmare when you try to train people. So when you're looking at potentially upgrading and introducing, trying to have one standard evacuation chair. The mats as well you can get, the slide mats. You can get powered evacuation chairs now as well. Now it'd be remarkably onerous to put a powered chair in every single floor of in every single refuge. Would that be reasonable? So our security team have a powered one, and they can turn up for any specific requirements, yet we have the normal ones in most of the buildings. So it's just thinking a little bit about that when you've got a larger estate to look after. And warning devices as well. A lot of our fire risk assessments that we've had done recently are picking up the lack of warning devices. We've got a lot of industrial areas, so we should probably have them anyway. But warning devices such as sounder strobes can help with people with hearing impairments and whatnot. I've got a particular chap who has to wear noise-cancelling headphones. He now has a lanyard with a vibrating lanyard, so if the alarms go off, he comes into work, he sticks that on, and he's happy. We did do a drill about 12 months ago, and he just sat there, and everyone was evacuating around him and leaving, and he was just sat there in his own little world with his headphones on. So obviously we want to try and overcome things like that. If you've got any sleeping accommodation, I know some hotels and whatnot have vibrating pillows and bits and pieces like that. So it's all these kind of things that you might need to consider as part of your PEEP when you're putting it together. Buddy system. This is becoming more challenging in the post-COVID environment. Certainly things like this and having enough fire wardens in the building at the same time because of hybrid working, it is a challenge. But what I would say is people are generally more comfortable with a friend or a close colleague to help them when they've got a PEEP. So try and get that incorporated into the PEEP, as long as the individual we're going to ask to help is willing to. Clearly, we don't want to force them into it. But one of the big things I've seen a few times, not particularly with this organisation but others, is people just being left in a disabled refuge on their own while there's a fire event going on. Put yourself in their position. How intimidating is that? Fire alarms are going off. You've got no idea what's going on. But we'll talk a little bit about how we can use EVCs effectively in a little while. But definitely have somebody with them at all times for me. So just a couple of slides on just some of the key things to include in the PEEP. So we need to include why we need a PEEP in the first place, what is driving us towards having a PEEP, and do we need one? Details of the person, overview of the impairment, and what are the likely barriers that we need to face to get them to a safe evacuation. How do we get them from point A to the disabled refuge? That's phase one. And then how do we get them down the stairs, out of the refuge, out to safety? So it's a bit of a two-way thing. And looking, like I said before, if you've got people who are have visual impairment or hearing impairment, what mechanisms do we need to overcome the alerting sort of side of it? How we're going to get them to the refuges, who's going to assist, if assistance is needed in all, and communication, who's going to react to the alarm and who's going to do what. So if I give you an example of what we do at my site, all of the EVCs repeat down to a telephone in the reception where the main fire alarm panel is. If nobody responds to that panel, who's going to be on the end of the receiving end of the EVC talking to the person at the top? So we train our people when we're doing PEEPs. We say, right, for the first minute or so, it might be a little bit quiet, but the security team know to go straight to the EVC if it's activated, and to at least make contact to say, we're here, You know, we're going to go and investigate the fire. You're in a safe space. Have you got someone with you? Just talk to them and help them through that situation a little bit. And then they go into, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a sec. What equipment do you need? So, like I said before, if you know that the chairs that you've got in that building aren't going to support the person who you're trying to evacuate, you need to get new chairs potentially. Do you need to get every single stairwell with new chairs? Potentially not, but you've got to assess it and say, have we got the right equipment to support the PEEP? So giving information to responders, one thing we have just upgraded is all of our EVCs now go to our security lodge. They can't talk to anyone, but they at least notify security, so they can let the responding security crew know there's an EVC that's active and there's somebody up there that needs assistance. So things like that, just making sure that people responding to the event are actually aware of what's going on. Training for people involved. I know a lot of places that have got really advanced fire alarm systems and they don't know how to use them. So our security team, being honest, weren't 100% sure about how to use the technology that we had. So now they're all trained and we've overcome that. But training people on the kit, training people on the chairs, the evac chairs, making sure that they're familiar and able to use the equipment when we need them to. Test it. Test the plan. So as soon as you've got your PEEP in place and everybody's aware of what's going on, have a drill. Throw in an inject that somebody needs to get somebody down from an EVC point. You might not physically have to do it on the chair, but go through the motions to make sure that people can enact the PEEP that we've put in place. And review the PEEP. You know, things change. So make sure that people who are the PEEP is about, make sure that they are reviewing the PEEP with you on a 12-monthly basis, or if the circumstances change. So, for instance, a chap on the prosthetics who says he's fine, we have a catch-up, probably a lot more often than annually, just to make sure that that's still the case, because he does have other conditions that relate to his problems. So it's just getting into that sort of review cycle. So that's PEEPs. Not a huge amount on this, because GEEPs are pretty generic. It's a standard plan, and basically a GEEP is a generic emergency evacuation plan. And this is for more your ad hoc situations. So not all of our buildings have disabled refuges, not all of our buildings have evac chairs. If there's nobody in that building that needs one at the moment, we are moving towards improving that. But at the moment, our GEEP says if we've got a visitor on site who needs evacuating potentially, then the security team are like the backdrop to cover that off, so that at least we've got a plan so that the security team can rock up with an evac chair and get people down safely. And GEEPs are particularly tailored to visitors with limited mobility generally, and that's just a very simple example. You've probably seen them on the inside of your hotel doors. So it's just something that's generic that tells people where things are, where the refuges are, and how to get out of the building. And generally with things like hotels and residential and student accommodation, that discussion will take place at the start if there's anybody visiting that needs assistance in the event of. As I said before, my last slide, PEEPs in residential settings. So following the Grenfell tragedy, the Phase 1 inquiry report called for PEEPs for residents in high-rise residential flats. The government fairly quickly, well, I'll say fairly quickly for the government, acted and basically did a consultation and put some guidance and PEEP templates out. That was retracted remarkably quickly. And unfortunately, another consultation now is underway and a study. And as of the 2nd of September, about 3 weeks ago, the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government issued a statement saying that they had some findings, there's more to follow, and they were looking to introduce measures in 2025. So I guess if you're in that residential setting, it is a case of watch this space. Keep an eye on the government website, and obviously just try and keep up to date with what's going on in that space. bang to time, 21 minutes. I'm happy with that.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the floor? Oh. Thank you.
Engaging with members of staff, particularly new joiners, and those that have been with organisations for a long period of time, and sort of going, you might not be able to get out of this building without, engaging that, opening the conversation. Have you any tips for engaging in that and sort of getting across that initial hurdle and getting people to open that collaborative effort?
I think there's a level of honesty to be had with your buildings. If they're not completely compliant buildings, that's where we need to focus more effort on the PEEPs, and we need to get that buy-in from people. We need to consider working patterns, which offices are we putting people in, which, like for me, which laboratories. I had a situation where we had someone working on the 3rd floor, and I said, well, can they not work on another floor? Genuinely, a previous organisation I was at, they had their disabled access rooms on the 2nd floor. It's like, why are they not on the ground floor? They're doing a refurb next year. They moved them all to the ground floor now. So it's just sometimes some simple things can come in. But I really think during that induction process, it's just acknowledging the fact that either, yeah, we've got all these things in place. Have you got any needs that we need to be aware of? And let's start that conversation going, and just being honest with them. We've got areas within our built environment that are just unsuitable for some certain impairments, but it's just 'cause it's what we do. It's an industrial setting, and we can't avoid it without completely rebuilding the place. But we can make reasonable adjustments, and I think it's just having that conversation.
We were actually talking this morning, weren't we, Steve, about PEEPs and having that open and honest sort of conversation. And we were saying, if people don't want to disclose something to you, how do we get round that? And I think, making people feel comfortable to be able to be open and honest with you, but then it's, are they actually going to do what the plan says? So again, another conversation that we were having, something was put in place, and during an emergency, they decided to do something completely different. So again, it's that understanding the importance of why these things are put in place. Any other questions from the floor? Lovely.
With the buddy system, would the buddy need to be a fire warden, or does that not matter at all?
I don't think so personally. I think it's just got to be right for the circumstances. If you train your fire wardens in evac chairs, it might be a case of the buddy doing a bit of training, even if it's just part of the fire warden course, where they do the training on the chairs. So I personally not hard and fast on that. You want your fire wardens to be sharp about stuff like this, but you also want the people who are enacting it to be able to do the job. So no, but a buddy for me, as long as they're trained to do what we're asking them to do. And I'm doing another session in about 25 minutes on training, and it kind of, it's what are we asking people to do? Are we training them and equipping them to do it as we're asking? Yeah.